want to live in a mountain waiting to eat the feudal elite. Hi and welcome to my channel Explain. My name is EK and in this video I want to indulge in my 3 favourite passions: history, horror movies and giving my unsolicited opinion. Please note this video contains mentions of the Nazi persecution of Jews and of slavery in North America, as well as general elements found in horror films. I adore horror films, they are my most favourite genre of film, and as it is that most beautiful time of the year, I thought I would rank some of the horror films I've seen that are set in the past. I've got 5 tiers on my little tier thing, she's technical, but just for simplicity I'm just calling them 5-star, 4-star, you know, let's not reinvent the wheel here. I'll issue kind of a blanket spoiler warning. I'll maybe try and put timestamps down below so that you can skip ahead if needed, but without further gilding the lily and with no more ado, let's rank some horror films. First of all, we have Apostle from 2018. This film is set in the early 20th century. A man goes to a mysterious commune to try and find his sister and cult things ensue. The main guy is played by the guy from Downton Abbey. I don't know which guy. And then the main cult guy is played by Michael Sheen, who is the Welsh one, not the one in West Wing. I know they're not called the same thing, it's Michael Sheen and Mine Sheen, but the only way I can keep them straight in my head is Welsh one, West Wing one. It's sort of kind of body horror meets Midsummer meets The Village, and compared to a lot of the films on this list, this really it carries the plot through to the end. The last third is as interesting as the first 2. There is one kind of element, like the backstory of the Downton Abbey character comes really out of left field and seems quite unnecessary. But apart from that, it's pretty solid, so I am going to give it 4 stars. Another film set in the early 20th century is The Woman in Black. Now, everybody told me this was a good film. It is not a good film and everyone is a liar. I have a lot of respect for Daniel Radcliffe for taking kind of the Elijah Wood route of I made a shit ton of money when I was a teenager slash young adult and now have the freedom to pick only the roles I find interesting. But if that's the case, I don't know why Daniel Radcliffe picked this role, because it wasn't interesting. It's basically Daniel Radcliffe plays a lawyer who goes to a big spooky house to try and settle legal issues, and spooky things ensue. It very much felt like someone kind of smashed Dickens and Agatha Christie together and made it shit. Even the kind of aesthetics of it, because it is it's much more gothic horror than just horror. But I don't know, I just felt like even the visuals and the cinematography wasn't really doing it for me. As a result, it is getting 2 stars. It's getting 2 stars because the sequel to this film is even worse. So the first film therefore benefits from relativity. The Woman in Black 2, subtitled Angel of Death. I mean, nobody lied to me and said that this one was good, at least, but it's just really boring. It's set in World War II. It's a teacher getting evacuated to the country with a load of kids and spooky things ensue. It kind of the way it used World War II ended up coming across as very ITV2 afternoon movie vibes. Not even ITV2, ITV3. I would call it a dark Goodnight Mr. Tom, but A, Goodnight Mr. Tom is amazing, and B, Goodnight Mr. Tom is already quite dark. So yeah, it's getting 1 star. I do think that some of my disdain of this film arises from the fact that I don't really vibe with World War II military history. In general, I don't enjoy World War II based films, but horror is usually the exception to that. Because I enjoy watching Nazis suffer, and the next film on this list kind of promised that, but ultimately failed to stick the landing. So this film, Ghosts of War, had so much promise. It's about a group of American soldiers towards the end of World War II who are ordered to hold a French chateau. As is probably obvious, spooky things ensue. Said spooky things mainly centre on the spirits of the chateau's former owners who were executed for hiding Jews. Now in itself, I do remember thinking with that storyline wow, it's all about kind of the American soldiers' response to that, rather than the victims. And then the ending, the twist, which by the way, you're not M. Night Shyamalan, okay? Just make a film that has an ending that makes sense. But the twist here just kind of compounded that. I don't, maybe tastelessness is the word. Now, if you want to truly understand my despair at the film, you need to go and watch it and learn the twist ending organically. But if you can't be bothered, the ending is that these World War II era soldiers are actually in modern day Afghanistan in like on VR headsets, like Black Mirror style, and it's the soldiers recovering. I can't remember if it's like physical recovery or mental recovery or kind of both, but they are recovering after the trauma of having witnessed an Afghani family be executed. So again, the trauma of the American soldiers is prioritized over these victims of murder, and it was very, I don't know, it didn't work. It felt like a twist trying to be clever for the sake of being clever. It was giving a little bit Game of Thrones season 8, so it is getting 1 star. Okay, the last of the World War II centric films on this list is called Blood Vessel. This film shows the survivors of a shipwreck happening upon a Nazi battleship which appears empty except for a small group of vampires that have been kidnapped by the Nazis from Romania. I thought that this was quite a good kind of evolution or a new take on the whole like Nazi horror film. Although while I was like researching and checking details, it did say in like the plot summary on Wikipedia that it was set in the North Atlantic, and I'm kind of thinking like, but presumably they were coming from Romania, like where are they taking these vampires in the North Atlantic? This may have been clarified in the film. It was a few years ago that I watched it, but generally it was very original, as I said, both in terms of like a Nazi horror film, but also in terms of like a shipwreck, ghost ship type situation. So that is getting 4 stars. The next film, which is still war related, takes place just after World War I, and that is The Awakening. Terrible name, by the way. Like, there is such a trend of horror films being like The Happening, The Conjuring, The Spooky Name. Like, come on, the imagination. This film takes place after World War I. It features a woman played by Rebecca Hall who works to expose kind of fake mediums and clairvoyance, in part motivated by the loss of her husband during the war. She is invited to investigate a supposedly haunted boarding school. Imelda Staunton is in it, as is the fellow who played Bran in Game of Thrones, and Dominic West. As in, Dominic West is also in it. The guy from Game of Thrones didn't play Dominic West. I think the kind of historic background of like the war's aftermath worked really well, especially kind of with the grief of Hall's character and the experiences in war of West's character. But the twist ending was weak. Like, let endings just be endings. I would prefer an ending that is more predictable or expected but feels kind of satisfying and gives a resolution than an ending that I never saw coming but doesn't, kind of feels a bit hollow, you know? Because Rebecca Hall is good in it. All the performances are pretty good. And I do remember like enjoying it as I watched it. It was just the ending that kind of, yeah. So I'm giving it 3 stars. The next film is Bram Stoker's Dracula. Weirdly, considering how much I like spooky things and spooky kind of aesthetics, I actually found this film kind of surprisingly unengaging. I had to try and watch it several times before I actually got all the way through, and having kind of reread the plot summary, I don't remember it being that interesting. Like, the plot summary of the film sounds interesting. I'm just like, that's not the film I remember watching. Keanu Reeves and Winona Ryder are both excellent in it. Keanu Reeves's English accent rivals Dick Van Dyke's, and I find that utterly charming. I was a little bit disappointed, having not read the book, that more of it didn't take place in Dracula's castle. Instead it was kind of just in Victorian England. But there is so much of it that I feel I should have enjoyed. I'm almost gaslighting myself now, like, did I secretly enjoy it and don't remember? But in all honesty, I'm giving it a 2. The next film is Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter. This film is about Abraham Lincoln, who, after vampires murder his family, trains to become a vampire hunter, also somehow finding time to become the President of the United States, which I guess Molly May was right, we do all have the same 24 hours. But with this, okay, so this film, just come with me on this, okay? This film came out in 2012, as did the Daniel Day-Lewis film Lincoln. I had vaguely heard of both films, like I think I'd seen the posters, but I hadn't really like looked into them. And for some reason, my brain decided that the two of them were like part of a franchise, and that Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter was a sequel to the first one. I think this is partly because of like the tyranny of the colon, which sounds far more entertaining than it really is. A tyranny which still exists in much of the world's media, where sequels no longer get called like Title 2, but get just a colon and then some kind of qualifier. Marvel is pretty much the worst for this, so I blame them. But basically I started watching Lincoln on a flight and I was like, where are the vampires? I don't know how my mind rationalised the fact that they came out around the same time as each other, but I don't think it's wise to try and apply logic to this. I recently watched the vampire one. I didn't finish Lincoln, by the way. I was so disappointed by the lack of vampires that I think I ended up watching 7 Psychopaths, if I remember correctly, and thoroughly enjoying it. But I recently watched the Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, and you know what, it was alright. It was fun. Going into it, I knew I fancied Rufus Sewell because I've seen A Knight's Tale, and I'm a big fan of Mary Elizabeth Winstead, particularly in horrors. She comes up in another horror further down the line. But I was slightly surprised by how much I wanted to rail Dominic Cooper. Not surprised in that like he's not unattractive, he is attractive, but I guess I just wasn't vibing with his Costa del Sol, Mamma Mia persona. It was a very weird and quite ambitious film. I would watch sequels of it, including ones that starred Daniel Day-Lewis. It's this kind of like unapologetic smushing of history and horror together, and I think if you go into it ready to have a bit of fun, you will also enjoy it. It was a little bit dicey how it kind of incorporated the issue of slavery. I just think that film, which focuses so much on the enslavement of black people in North America, maybe needed a more diverse kind of main cast, and even the bits in the film that feature enslaved black people, that kind of whole storyline ends up being very much fronted by Mary Elizabeth Winstead's character, so it was a little bit, some choices were made. But I gave it 4 stars. Really? 4? Do you know, no, we're gonna go with 4. I'm feeling kind and generous, and like Dominic Cooper was really good looking in it, so I think it made me perceive Dominic Cooper in a new light because it's very much giving Laszlo Cravensworth, and I'm about that. He is also in the next film on this list, Dracula Untold. The titular hero, played by Luke Evans, is given a very sympathetic retelling. It has him kind of choosing vampirism to defend like his princedom and protect his family, etc. Charles Dance is briefly in it as Dracula's kind of sire, vampiric sire, who lives in a mountain, which, I mean, he stole the show, and also goals. I want to live in a mountain waiting to eat the feudal elite. One interesting casting choice, however, was Dominic Cooper. He plays the Ottoman Emperor, and they basically just gave him a fake tan and eyeliner, which was, you know, it's not a choice I would have made. I think this was one of the films with which Universal was trying to launch. I think they called it its Dark Universe, kind of like a relaunch of its old horror branding. And I do think that this film, which I'm going to give 3 stars, I think this film could have achieved that, but unfortunately this enterprise could not survive Tom Cruise's remake of The Mummy. Speaking of, let me preach to what I hope is the choir with the next 2 films, The Mummy and The Mummy Returns. Both top tier, unquestionably. These are cinematic gold, and every actor should have been nominated for an Oscar, including Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson as the Scorpion King. Both films revolve around Egyptologist Evelyn Carnahan and swashbuckling adventurer Rick O'Connell accidentally resurrecting an ancient Egyptian priest whose main priority is resurrecting his ancient Egyptian girlfriend. This film represents such a specific part of modern queer culture, which is taking a film with absolutely zero explicit existence of anybody non-cishet, but knowing in your heart, nevertheless, that it is hella gay. Through the films, which launched 1,000 queer historians, including me, they are so fun and they don't take themselves seriously at all, and they are both getting 5 stars. Fun fact, I actually used to be too scared to watch the Mummy films. I remember the first one being on telly at some point in the early 2000s, and there's a bit at the end where one of the characters gets stuck inside a pyramid, and I was so terrified of it. And now I'm making a YouTube video about all the different horror films that I have seen. I would say what on earth happened, but I know what happened. And what happened is that I watched the next film on this list called The Conjuring in 2013. The Conjuring for me is very precious because it is the film that made me realise I enjoyed horror films. The film, which has since launched a kind of wider Conjuring franchise, shows renowned paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren as they investigate a haunting in Rhode Island. It's a pretty standard kind of exorcism plot, but the performances of all of the cast I think are what really kind of give it that edge. It maybe relies a little bit too much on jump scares, but I am also scared a little bit too much by jump scares, so I am going to give it a 4. Now we get to probably the weakest film in the aforementioned Conjuring extended universe, and that is The Nun. I have watched most of the Conjuring kind of films. Like there's 3 Annabelle films, there's 3 Conjuring films, there's The Nun, and there's going to be The Nun 2, and then The Curse of La Llorona. And The Nun and The Curse of La Llorona were definitely the 2 worst ones. I don't know if there's any others. There might be some others. The Conjuring 2 wasn't that great either. But anyway, The Nun is about a nun and some other fella going to a convent in Romania to investigate a demon or some shit. It is meant to tie into the wider franchise because Lorraine Warren has like some visions of this demon that they're going to confront in one of the other films. Honestly, the plot is like barely that. And considering how good Taissa Farmiga is in American Horror Story, like she is excellent in all of the seasons of American Horror Story that she's been in. Her performance was surprisingly underwhelming, as was pretty much everyone else's. The ending was so boring that I realised when looking up the plot that I had misremembered the ending to be slightly more interesting than it actually was. I was reading through it and I was like, oh, that's even more boring than I thought. So I'm giving it a 1 star. Next up is kind of sort of 2 films, but not, because only one really counts under this video's remit of being in the past, and that is It Chapter 1. It is a 2-parter, It Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. It's not really a film and a sequel. It is like 2 parts of the same film, and the plot centres on a clown called Pennywise who torments a bunch of kids in a town called Derry. Somehow the film manages to kind of capture some brief moments of optimism, but it's pretty scary. Like It Chapter 1 and It Chapter 2 are the only films where I have been as, if not more, scared on the rewatch. Like I think knowing what was about to happen somehow made it worse. Both films were obviously incredibly successful, probably one of the most popular mainstream horrors in a long time. The performances are all really good. The group dynamic of the kids is very believable. It's pretty light on the kind of historical situation thing. So the first one is set in 1989, I think. Apart from like the lack of mobile phones, it's not really heavy on that 1980s vibe so much as it is kind of miscellaneous nostalgia, but nevertheless it's a good film. I think I will give it a 4. Next up is The Thing, specifically the 2011 prequel. The original film is not set in the past, it's set in the 1980s, which is when it came out, but because this is a prequel, it's obviously earlier back than that. I don't know why I'm explaining that, like, you know how time works. Both films have a bunch of scientists in the Antarctic who find an alien, and then the alien is able to kind of assimilate itself into looking like anybody or anything. So it's all kind of working out who is an alien or who isn't. It's kind of a bottle episode plot combined with a whodunit. Apparently this film was not very well received, like critically and by fans. I really enjoyed it. Mary Elizabeth Winstead, I think she's just a top tier horror actress. So there's this one, obviously she was in the Abraham Lincoln one. She's also in the 5th Final Destination film, and she's very good at that. And then she is in 10 Cloverfield Lane, which I mentioned in my film from last year or the year before, just listing my favourite horror films of all time. I actually only watched the original The Thing from the 1980s this year, and I really enjoyed that as well. I think, however, it gets 4 stars rather than the 5 because the ending was kind of meh. Like I think with prequels, endings are extra hard because the audience already knows what's going to happen. But I feel like because of that, for some of the characters, they just kind of gave up and were like, well, they didn't need an ending. You see what happens next. Yeah, but I've still like sat down and watched this for an hour and a half. Like, do I not deserve an ending? But yeah, 4 stars for The Thing. That 4-star bracket is looking, it's getting cozy. Oh, I didn't put The Mummy Returns. Yes, I did. Why are there 2 things of The Mummy Returns? The Mummy Returns is going up there twice. Why not? The next film, as with it, this isn't really a film and sequel so much as one film, but it's a trilogy. And that is Fear Street Parts 1, 2 and 3. It almost is kind of like a mini series, just with very long episodes. Like they probably could have, like they could have cut it each 1.5 and had it as 6. But the way the story works out, so the first part is set in the 1990s, the second part is set in 1978, and then the third part is set in 1666. So, you know, understandably it kind of breaks it up naturally. These 3 films are up there as kind of my favourite horror films of all time. It's up there with The Descent. All 3, as I said, are set in the past. Overall, they are slasher films. I like slasher films because they usually centre on young people, teenagers or young adults, but the writers are always adults, and I find it really interesting to see how the adults are writing the younger characters. It can either be like incredibly realistic and representative of the misery that is adolescence, or it's very like, oh, these kids and their damn phones. There's a spectrum, and these films are very much on the kind of realistic, kind of represent the chaos that comes with being a young adult. So in the first film, they kind of face off against serial killers from the past, and at the end of the first film, they track down a woman who has been through the same thing to try and get help from her. And in the second film, it is that character explaining what happened when she went through it in the 70s. And then the third film looks at kind of the early colonial roots of this local kind of supernatural curse. If you like Stranger Things, you will like these films. If you like kind of slasher teen horrors, you will like these films. And if you're a lesbian, you will like these films. So Fear Street is going right. Did I really only Fear Street and The Mummy? I think I'd maybe have to rewatch Blood Vessel, and that would potentially get up to the 5-star spot. But you know, I've got like, you know, I'm not just handing out these 5 stars willy-nilly. So I've added a load of the images, like the posters that are downloaded. But apparently also on my desktop was a meme about Liz Truss's few weeks as Prime Minister. So where should we put that one then? Where should we put that one? I think 5 stars. You can go with 5 stars. And there you have it. That is my official 2022 ranking of a few history horror films that I happen to have seen. Do you agree with my ranking? Are there any films on this list that you have seen? Are there any films which are not on this list that I should see? Just let me know in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time.